Hello, folks. This is Ask a Grief Specialist. I'm your host, Crystal Carpenter. This disclaimer informs the listener that the views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this podcast belong solely to the author and not necessarily to the author's employer, organization, committees, or other groups and organizations. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical or mental health diagnosis or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified mental health providers with any questions you may have regarding mental health conditions or concerns. Never disregard professional mental health or medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you may have heard on this podcast. If you are having a mental health emergency, call your mental health provider, doctor, go to your local emergency department, or call 911 immediately. Also, never be afraid to reach out to the caring professionals at the National Suicide Hotline at 1-800-273-8225 by phone or by chat.
Hi everyone, my name is Reid and I consider myself a lifelong griever as well as someone who's done a lot of psychology education and have personal stories of losing my dad to suicide and losing my stepdad to cancer. And after my stepfather died, I went through a grief process myself that was probably the most surprising of my lifetime. I felt immense loneliness and had a hard time. I sought out community support as far as working with a personal one-on-one grief counselor and also joining bereavement support groups through local hospice where I live. And they've definitely helped. They were very positive experiences and supportive experiences. And I just had this unique experience where I was like, man, I just don't understand why I feel so lonely. And I really explored, a lot of relationship dynamics with my dad, my stepdad, and it's a little bit of a complicated story. But essentially, it led me on this journey to realizing that although I got a master's degree in psychology, I wasn't really utilizing my counseling skills. I was working for technology-based companies. And I guess, for lack of a better term, Crystal, I just kind of felt like a calling coming to me and said, hey, I really think I'd like to fill a void, helping people that are grieving who also experience immense loneliness in their grief journey. And so I came up with a concept of providing a mobile application that could provide grief support on a daily basis and developed that and started a little business. I don't think of myself as a businessman, but started a little business called Grief Refuge, and it has a mobile app on the App Store and the Google Play Store for people to use at pretty much anytime they want. And that's a bit about my story.
Well, thanks for sharing. It sounds like that journey that you had through life with all your experiences, both maybe what we might classify positive or negative, really led you to that point of making that decision. It sounds like it wasn't like an overnight thing.
Definitely was not. It probably, it's so interesting. Like, I I had an intuition that my dad was going to take his life. Not like he was going to do it like the night he did or the day he did, but growing up, I always just kind of felt like my dad is deeply troubled. And I think essentially his death will come by his own doing. And that ended up being reality. And then also Warren, my stepfather, his battle with cancer was an 8-year process, an 8-year journey. And man, he was in and out of the hospital a lot. And, I'm very sensitive. And so I kind of had a lot of deeper conversations with Warren, and I could really track like him losing his will to live. Like he kept growing tired and tired and tired and, essentially gave up. not that he gave up on life, but he just gave up on the fight. And he actually had a heart attack, I think, that caused his death, but he was really compromised physically, tremendously. But I share all that bits and pieces, Crystal, because all that time, the I guess 12 to 15 years as a young adult, paying attention to my dad's behaviors and thinking about what's going to happen with his life. And then after Warren gets cancer, another 8 years of that, thinking about, hey, the prognosis with cancer is not a good result for most people. And so I thought a lot about it, and, it really helped me, just pay attention to, I guess, just any idea and thought in life, really has like long-term effects, they really impact our lives, and life is indeed short. And so it really put me on like I don't know, an existential an existential questioning and whole search for meaning. And even, now that years have passed since both my dad and Warren, my stepdad, have died, I still think about these things. I talk to a lot of people, obviously, because I'm in the field of grief support. But the way we make the app, we have to make a lot of content. So these experiences, as far as life, death, and managing difficult and challenging emotions, thoughts and emotions that we call grief. That's really on my plate every day.
Absolutely, and I think that's what makes you so uniquely poised to do an app in the correct way. Because I think if someone's heart wasn't in it and they weren't in it for the right reasons, that app wouldn't maybe serve the community in the way it maybe needed to. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with you. Yes. I get a lot of feedback that when people reach out and say a little bit about their experience, one of the things that really stands out as like a common theme from people all over the world is that they say thanks. And the reason why is because they speak to just feeling validated in their own experience. Crystal, when I was making the app, I was like, this is almost like an impossible feat because grief is so unique. And I don't know how to, speak to somebody's grief experience without knowing, the details of their own story. I think storytelling for grieving is almost as vitally important as anything else, for somebody to heal. And so I was like, ooh, this is an impossible task, but I did do, um, I guess I'll give myself some credit, the smart things, to do market research and ask, survey people that are grieving and survey people that, utilize technology for support. And that sparked ideas for features for the app. And then that led to the development of it. And so when the content's there, I do my best to be as careful as possible to use terminology, to use English language that is more relatable to what we call norms. Um, Try to make sure that, I'm not expressing any form of judgment whatsoever, just trying to come from a place of empathy and compassion. And the app, trying to, through technology, trying to help hold space, so people can feel like their grief is a bit more normalized. They can feel like they have something when they need it. I hear a lot of people saying, I wish I could call so and so at 2, 3 in the morning because I'm waking up, I'm laying there, and I'm struggling. And so, fortunately, the Grief Refuge app has been able to fill that need, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I think that's a major pro of the technology and internet space and age as the way that we grieve in society has changed is that, people who are struggling, no matter if it's, 2 a.m. or 2 p.m., that they can reach out somewhere and find community and authenticity in a space that feels safe for them.
Yeah, I think I like the key word of authenticity too. I get a lot of praise of like, hey, this is a little bit more authentic. It's not as like sculpted or scripted. I think in grief, it's interesting. Most people are seeking some kind of formula. They're seeking some kind of like result until they get to a point where they're like, oh, I've now learned in my own grief journey that it's more of an experience. It's not this like end finish line and I'm done grieving and life is grand. I may
And I
feel
get my
better,
gold
but
star.
I get
I
my
did
gold
my
star.
grief
Yes.
right.
I passed. I passed the grief process. And yeah, and I think I hold the belief that it does impact somebody lifelong, not as intense, not as immense, perhaps not even as frequent. But at times, I mean, it's 16 years later since my dad ended his life, and I'll be honest, on Father's Day this year, I was feeling pretty down, and I was really grieving him. And
We
these things
never get
happen.
over it. We learn to live within it. And I think that denies our humanity when we live in a society that's like, aren't you quote unquote over it yet?
Over it. Yeah, very dangerous words to use for grieving
Absolutely.
people.
What are some other ways that you feel like technology has benefited modern grievers?
Well, I think through the use of technology, memories are um, so much easier to store. Uh, because hey, life is busy, in this day and age, and so the societal norm is to keep going, go, 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 do, experience and keep going forward. And when like I wasn't really using technology a lot to help honor my father or honor my own grief process. It's a little bit before that. But now, 16 years later after his death, like I do my best efforts to hold or recall memories that are both difficult and also both pleasant in our relationship dynamics. There's a lot of difficult experiences because my dad was an alcoholic and a Vietnam veteran who had post-traumatic stress, and his life was a struggle. Um, I just um, I just think, in addition to Grief Refuge, isn't really built to store memories, but I'll say technology. Since you asked the question about technology, there's so many platforms and so many tools that help with remembering and honoring loved ones, and I think that's really important.
Absolutely, and I think there's room building upon that in the ways, tying back to what you said earlier is, thinking about and building legacy and meaning making in that digital space. Whether through Grief Refuge or other apps or technology spaces where, you can find and build those meanings and legacies and keep that person's, memory alive in the way that feels authentic to a person.
Mhm. Yes, the way they want to remember their loved one. That's really important because I actually think technology is like such a gift, for lack of a better word, to help somebody remember their loved one more authentically.
Absolutely. And, be able to have access. I encourage people to think about would you want photos or voice recordings or, video recordings, interviewing, your loved one, that work we can do even before someone passes. and dies if we get that opportunity. I
Hmm.
know that's not always the case.
Yeah, not always, but yeah, there's definitely tools that are being built to help preserve and make this more convenient, and these types of ways to honor and remember. Now you've got me thinking about artificial intelligence. Would I like to keep an ongoing relationship with a loved one through artificial intelligence? I personally would not, but I also don't judge. I have no judgment on the way people want to cope with grief or loss. And so
Absolutely.
if it if it's perceived to be very helpful for someone to continue to communicate with I don't even know what the terminology is, but like a 3D hologram or
Yeah.
an artificial machine, almost sounding like their loved one who has passed on. I think that can be very positive and supportive, as much as, what people might judge it to be creepy or uncomfortable.
Well, and I think that's a great point that you raise, whether that's in the space of technology or not. I think a lot of what I hear clients saying is, feeling judged by others in some way about how they're grieving or not grieving, So how can we, as humans, just be a little less judgmental, especially in that grief space of how I grieve is not going to be how Reid grieves or how you grieve or anyone else grieves. It's such a personal journey and experience.
You nailed it, Crystal. Yeah. Judgment is, I think it's a critical ingredient, not just to avoid, but to pay attention to for people that are grieving. Because I got kind of like this theory I'd like to share with you. I think that uh, when people open up to their grief and they really feel the depths of it, they're so immensely vulnerable and overwhelmed. Obviously, their brain functioning and physiological functioning is overwhelmed, and but there's also the vulnerability piece. And this Western culture we live in, vulnerability is often a very individualized experience, or perhaps it's just an intimate partner that it's shared with. So I think because vulnerability just isn't expressed as openly in public for people that are grieving, where perhaps you may feel as much rage, as much sadness, as much depression. I mean, who knows what the emotion is? You may also feel as more vulnerable than what you're normally comfortable with, and wow, I mean, there's more to add onto the plate. There's more to quote unquote manage or handle when grieving.
People
It's
saying
a
like,
lot.
I feel like everybody just knows, just sees that I'm grieving and I can't hide that.
For
But I
sure.
think that
Yeah.
also comes back to we're a very grief and death defying culture. Feelings are gross and keep that away.
Right.
So that's an area of maybe feeling vulnerability because we're even experiencing such intense emotions within ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I'm curious if you agree. I think another pro of the technology space is building community or apps or areas where people can feel like they have a space to document that journey.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm definitely a huge advocate for the documentation piece. Grief Refuge has a journal feature. There's also another feature that's called My Grief Journey. And it's almost like a daily self-questionnaire assessment that a user of the application can do. And it gives them a numeral score. And I wish it would be different, because I don't want people to quote unquote quantify, their grief progress, and then judge themselves if they're not showing the progress. But it helps give them something at least, for the data crunchers. They say, oh, okay, this gives me like perspective. These numbers give me perspective, and so using the daily refuge is definitely a documentation process in itself. With the Grief Refuge app, we've actually, we're focused on a community building, but we're going to be integrating more live events through the application itself,
That's
so that
awesome.
people can feel a sense of community. And I gravitate towards the terminology companionship. It's a philosophy that I've found and have learned from with the teachings of the Center for Loss and Life Transition out of Fort Collins, Colorado. And I just want to make sure that people feel like space is held for them, because a lot of people don't feel like in their personal network, their nuclear family and or some of their intimate friends, there's a lot of secondary losses, strange relationships with family members due to whatever circumstances, friends that just don't know how to show up for the person that's grieving, so the relationship ends, they lose touch, and people that are grieving really find it more comforting to connect with people who at least have a similar type of loss. And so we'll be implementing that within the Grief Refuge app to be able to um, provide some companionship for people that are experiencing certain types of losses. Or I'm really keen on experiencing specific emotions related to the grief process. So like, you know, um, it might be hard for people to own up to it, but like, hey, if I'm feeling really depressed, let's focus on talking through, some of our depressed grief related feelings
Or
in this.
even if I'm like happy, it's okay to feel happy someone died. They could have been a
Yeah,
really
right.
detrimental person in my life, and it can feel kind of uncomfortable of like, ugh, but it's okay if you feel relief or happy someone's gone out of your life.
Yeah, exactly. So true. Yeah. It can be hard to feel joy or allow yourself to feel joy. And be like, hey,
Yeah.
that's actually funny. Why am I not laughing? Oh, I'm kind of telling myself it's not okay to laugh because I still feel grief.
Absolutely. And I think it's so great that you're working to build that specific companionship. I think, especially for, I found stillbirth, early childhood loss. I find a lot of parents really struggle sometimes in finding other people who've experienced and understand what it might be like to go through that. And I've
Yeah.
heard how beneficial over and over and over again it is for people just to have others that have experienced something similar so we feel like we're not so alone in this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Once somebody starts feeling so alone, being alone, feeling alone, it's almost like it is feeding the beast of loneliness, and loneliness feeds the beast of fear, and fear gets the best of us.
Yeah. Is there any other perks you feel like of technology or apps or internet in this grief space that we haven't touched on yet?
Hmm. Well, you brought up the community space, and I know that there's um, a lot. I don't know how many, but a lot of social media related groups. And I'll be honest, I'll say that I haven't had the most positive experience through that. I think that it's a little tricky. We often use text as like a primary form of communication. And I'm not just referring to mobile text, I'm referring to like kind of typing anything on our keypads. And so with social media, if you think about like Facebook groups, well, if I post that I'm really struggling, it's interesting because for some people they can get comments or replies that say something like I'm so sorry, and that can feel really comforting, just to know that you're being heard. So there's definitely positive experiences, but for me personally, I tried aspects of that and it just didn't work for me. I think it was me because, maybe I'm just a little bit more reserved. And I was like, you know, somebody that may be trying to relate, we don't really know each other. We're just in this group together. And so
Mm.
I didn't feel the most, I don't know the right word, Crystal. I just didn't feel, I guess, trusting. I didn't really feel
Yeah.
as trusting of it. And so it's been something I've pondered, does grief related, groups on social media help? And I still don't know the answer. And I don't think I can't really, provide an answer for everyone. I can really only speak for myself. And that personally has been like more of a no than a yes. And also, more of the people I've talked to have said it hasn't really worked for them either. So,
That's
you
what I've
know,
heard as well. I
oh,
think,
really?
yeah, I think from a, clinician's aspect, because I've, thought about it, you can think about it kind of from the hat of user experience as, personal experience as well as from kind of the clinical research, theoretical lens. And I think there's just too much room for randomized chaos where because no one's really moderating it. Some groups are very, very broad, some are more specific. And I think there's just not enough structure or containment within that I'm not saying it doesn't work for some people. I tell people if it works for you, great. If it doesn't, we can try other things. Sometimes it's trial and error of finding those things that work for us when we're grieving. And I'm sure you've experienced that what can work for one loss may not work for a different loss. Each grief journey can be unique. But I've, heard from more people than not that that was a space where they didn't feel comforted, didn't feel supported, didn't feel heard, or got really overwhelmed of trying to hold other people's grief.
Hmm. That's so interesting. Appreciate you sharing that.
It's great to hear your experience too. What is kind of more universal or what are things that are more individualized? It sounds like the consensus, if we're polling, is, more people it doesn't work, but for the group it does, great. Go find support where you feel like it works and is helpful.
Yeah. Yes.
Are there any negatives that you feel like are ways that technology can be, detrimental or cause harm? Because nothing is all positive, unfortunately.
Well, I I guess yes. I tie in with the vulnerability piece. You know, my I guess my opinion that many grievers can be extremely vulnerable. And when I'll use myself an example, when I've been in situations where I have felt extremely vulnerable, it's almost like a sense of feeling lost. And when one is lost, it's hard to find your own path. So we seek support and perhaps even guidance. And unfortunately, through technology, there could be people who either have good intentions and just don't have, the skill sets or the education, um, and they kind of steer people on a very perhaps a more painful path. Or there's people who are online technology, they're actually intending, to be a little bit more harmful than helpful. It, unfortunately, it puts you out, or it puts you in touch with people. Online technology can put you in touch with people who may have bad intentions,
Yeah,
or even,
scamming
or
and
yeah,
malice,
scamming.
fraud, all kinds of,
Yeah,
bad things.
yeah, it
So I
can be
think,
really taken advantage of.
yeah, and I think the message with that is we are, I am never blaming the victim. That should not happen, to us, but, just be cautious when we're doing things online and knowing that we're in that really vulnerable state, because unfortunately that does make us more likely for us to be preyed on because bad people are looking for people to prey upon.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely. Well, it has been such a pleasure speaking with you. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about? Anything else you'd like to plug or topics we haven't touched on yet?
No, I think we've had a great conversation, Crystal. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your inquisitive questions. I respect the work that you do. You know, you're on the front lines, and I want to thank you for really showing up for people who need, who really do are in places in their lives where they're really leaning on helpful support. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I really appreciate that kind compliment. And I'm going to put a link in the description to the Grief Refuge. I've been checking it out myself. I love the content. And if people want to check it out, I think that's a really great space to go just for additional resources for anyone who may be grieving. So thanks so much, Reed, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Appreciate you, Crystal. Take care.